The plasma welder hissed and spat like an angry cat as Elena Vasquez adjusted the fusion settings for the third time that morning. Kepler 442b's twin suns cast harsh shadows through the mining colony's reinforced windows, their light fracturing into prismatic rainbows that danced across her workbench cluttered with salvaged components. She muttered a string of creative curses in 3 languages, 2 human, 1 she'd picked up from the Centaurian traders who occasionally stopped by for repairs. "You know, talking to machinery is the first sign of space madness," called out Jake Morrison from across the workshop, his voice muffled by the atmospheric recycler he was dismantling. "Though around here, I'd say it's more like a job requirement." Elena snorted, not looking up from her work. "Says the man who named his plasma drill Bertha and takes it out for romantic dinners in the observation deck." "Bertha and I have an understanding," Jake replied with mock dignity. "She doesn't explode in my face, and I don't replace her with a newer model." The familiar banter helped ease the monotony of another day maintaining the life support systems that kept their small outpost of humanity functioning on this dustball at the edge of Ethani space. Elena had been here 18 months now, long enough to know every rivet in the habitat domes and every quirk of the atmospheric processors that kept their little bubble of breathable air intact. Through the workshop's main viewport, she could see the Ethani settlement rising like crystalline flowers from the planet's rust-colored surface. Their architecture defied human understanding of structural engineering, all flowing curves and impossible angles that seemed to grow organically from the ground. The aliens themselves moved through their city with the same fluid grace, their elongated ears catching the light as they turned their heads with movements too quick and precise for human eyes to follow comfortably. Elena was adjusting a particularly stubborn fusion coupling when she first saw them, a young Ethani child struggling across the plaza that separated the 2 settlements. The child couldn't have been more than 7 in human years, though Ethani aging patterns remained a mystery to most humans. What struck Elena wasn't the child's obvious difficulty walking, but the way every adult Ethani in the vicinity suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. "Jake, take a look at this," she called, setting down her tools. Morrison joined her at the viewport, his weathered face creasing into a frown. "Poor kid's having a rough time of it." The child's left leg clearly wasn't developing properly, causing them to drag it with each labored step. Elena watched as they paused frequently, breathing hard in the thin atmosphere, while their mother, identifiable by the protective way she hovered nearby, maintained a careful distance. The woman's elegant ears drooped with what Elena had learned to recognize as distress in Ethani body language. "You know what their society thinks about physical imperfections," Jake said quietly. "Genetic purity laws and all that imperial nonsense." Elena nodded grimly. The Ethani Empire's obsession with physical and genetic perfection was legendary throughout the galaxy. What they couldn't fix, they tended to hide away or pretend didn't exist. The child's struggle was being ignored not out of cruelty, but out of an ingrained cultural inability to acknowledge that such problems could exist among the superior Ethani. "That's barbaric," Elena muttered, watching the child stumble and nearly fall. A simple mobility aid could change that kid's entire life. And violate about 17 different non-interference treaties in the process, Jake warned, though his tone lacked conviction. "You know what happened to Rodriguez on Tau Ceti. One act of humanitarian engineering and boom, diplomatic incident that nearly started a trade war." Elena was already moving toward her parts bins, her mind racing through possible designs. Rodriguez tried to revolutionize their entire agricultural system. "I'm talking about helping one kid walk. Completely different scale." "Elena." Jake's voice carried a warning, but she was already pulling components from their organized chaos, lightweight titanium struts, neural interface adapters, pressure sensors, and a microfusion cell that could power the whole assembly for years. "Look at it this way," she said, holding up a servo motor and grinning. "If I mess this up, at least I'll have an interesting story to tell during my deportation hearing." The truth was, Elena couldn't stop thinking about the child. That night, while the colony's artificial atmosphere recycled around her, she found herself sketching designs by the light of her workstation. The Ethani physiology was well documented, humans had been working alongside them for decades, even if always in subservient roles. Their bone density was lower than humans, their muscle fibers more efficient. A mobility aid that would be bulky and obvious on a human could be sleek and nearly invisible on an Ethani. Over the next several days, Elena threw herself into the project with the obsessive focus that had made her one of the colony's most valuable engineers. She fabricated components during her off hours, requisitioned materials under the vague category of habitat maintenance, and ran countless simulations on her personal computer. The device that emerged from her workshop looked more like jewelry than medical equipment, a series of elegant struts and joints that would blend seamlessly with Ethani aesthetic sensibilities while providing the support and correction the child needed. "You know," Jake observed, examining her work, "for someone who claims to be just a mechanic, you've basically created a work of art that happens to be functional." Elena powered up the device, watching the neural interfaces flicker to life with soft blue light. "Well, if you're going to cause an interstellar incident, might as well do it with style." The challenge now was getting close enough to the child to make the offer. Elena had learned enough about Ethani customs to know that approaching directly would be seen as presumptuous at best, insulting at worst. Instead, she began timing her routine maintenance walks to coincide with the child's daily struggles across the plaza. On the third day, opportunity presented itself when the child fell while attempting to navigate a particularly uneven section of ground. Elena was there in moments, ostensibly checking the atmospheric sensor array that happened to be nearby. She helped the child to their feet with careful, non-threatening movements. "Rough terrain," she commented in passable Ethani, gesturing at the ground. "Even humans have trouble with these surface irregularities." The child stared at her with wide eyes, a startling shade of violet that seemed to shift color in the dual sunlight. Their mother approached cautiously, her elegant features arranged in an expression of polite wariness. "Your kindness honors us," the woman said in heavily accented standard, "but we require no assistance." Elena nodded respectfully, then made a show of examining her tablet as if checking the sensor readings. "Of course. Though." She paused, as if struck by a sudden thought. "I couldn't help but notice." Lyraliai's hands trembled as she activated the quantum communicator, its crystalline surface pulsing with soft amber light. 3 days had passed since the human engineer had fitted her child with the mobility device, and those 3 days had been the most terrifying and wonderful of her life. Keth was running. Actually running through their dwelling's corridors, laughing with a joy she hadn't heard since before his condition became apparent. The communicator chimed with an incoming priority message from the district coordinator's office. Lyraliai's stomach dropped as Administrator Vexhi's stern features materialized in a holographic display, his ears rigid with disapproval. "Citizen Lyraliai," Vexhi's voice carried the formal tone reserved for official censure. "Reports have reached this office regarding your offspring's unusual mobility enhancement. You will report for questioning within the hour." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Lyraliai staring at the empty air where the hologram had been. From the next room came the sound of Keth's delighted laughter as he chased their domestic cleaning automaton around the furniture, something that would have been impossible just days before. "Mama!" Keth called out, bounding into the room with the kind of enthusiasm that made Lyraliai's heart soar and sink simultaneously. "Watch this." Her son demonstrated a series of jumps and pivots that showcased the remarkable engineering of the human device. The mobility aid moved with him like a second skin, its neural interfaces seamlessly translating his intentions into smooth, natural movement. To an untrained eye, it was nearly invisible, just elegant metalwork that complemented rather than concealed his condition. "Very impressive, little star," Lyraliai managed, though her voice caught slightly. "But perhaps we should practice being quieter today." Keth's violet eyes, so like his father's, studied her with uncomfortable perception. "Are you worried about the administrators again?" Before she could answer, their door chime announced a visitor. Lyraliai opened it to find Counselor Thren standing in the corridor, his official robes marking him as a representative of the Settlement Council. Behind him stood 2 enforcement officers, their presence making the social visit distinctly less social. "Lyraliai of House Moon Whisper," Thren intoned formally. The Council requests your immediate presence for consultation regarding recent developments. Of course, Lyralii replied, her diplomatic training taking over. Keth, remain here with Nanibot. I'll return shortly. As they walked toward the administrative complex, Thren's demeanor shifted to something approaching conversational. The human's device is quite remarkable, he admitted quietly. Our best biotechnicians have been studying the specifications your medical scan recorded. The integration with Ethani physiology is unprecedented. Is that problematic? Lyralii asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Everything about this situation is problematic, Thren sighed. Do you understand what you've done? For 3 days, your son has been visible throughout the settlement, demonstrating capabilities that our own medical science declared impossible. Citizens have been asking questions. They passed through the settlement's central plaza, where Lyralii noticed several groups of Ethani engaged in animated conversation. Their ears twitched with the kind of excited gossip that preceded major social upheavals. Near the fountain, a small crowd had gathered around healer Miraleth, who appeared to be giving an impromptu lecture about human engineering principles. Questions aren't necessarily dangerous, Lyralii ventured. These questions are, Thren replied grimly. Citizens are asking why our healers couldn't provide what a human engineer accomplished in her spare time. They're questioning the wisdom of genetic purity laws that would have condemned your son to a life of limitation. Worse, they're beginning to wonder what other problems humans might solve if we actually asked them. The administrative complex rose before them like a geometric crystal, its faceted surfaces reflecting the twin suns in patterns that hurt human eyes but soothed Ethani's sensibilities. Inside, Administrator Vexhai waited in his ceremonial chamber, surrounded by the glowing displays that connected him to the settlement's various monitoring systems. Citizen Lyralii, he began without preamble, your actions have created a significant administrative burden. In the past 72 hours, I have received inquiries from 17 different families requesting human assistance for various medical conditions. The Cultural Purity Office has launched an investigation. The Imperial Health Ministry is demanding detailed reports. Do you comprehend the magnitude of disruption you have caused? My son can walk, Lyralii replied simply. That seems worth some administrative inconvenience. Vexhai's ears flattened against his skull, a sign of severe irritation. Your personal satisfaction is irrelevant. The stability of our society depends on maintaining proper boundaries between species. When those boundaries blur, chaos follows. One of the monitoring displays began chiming urgently. Vexhai activated it with an irritated gesture, revealing a communication from the planetary capital. The face that appeared belonged to High Administrator Zephyros, whose authority extended over the entire system. Vexhai, Zephyros spoke without pleasantries, I trust you're aware of the situation in your district. Imperial intelligence has flagged unusual communication patterns suggesting coordinated questioning of medical policy. The Emperor himself has been briefed on the human intervention incident. Lyralii felt her blood chill. When situations reached Imperial attention, the consequences became unpredictable and often severe. High Administrator, Vexhai responded carefully, the incident involved a single human providing assistance to a single child. The disruption is localized and manageable. Localized? Zephyros's ears twitched with what might have been amusement or contempt. Our monitoring system shows similar discussions on 47 worlds across 6 sectors. Citizens are sharing recordings of the child's mobility through the Galactic Information Network. This human's simple kindness has become a symbol of imperial inadequacy. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the monitoring systems. Lyralii realized with growing horror that her decision to accept Elena's help had somehow escalated far beyond personal consequences. What are your orders, High Administrator? Vexhai asked. Immediate arrest of the human responsible. Full documentation of the device for Imperial study. Prepare a public statement explaining why this intervention was harmful to Ethani interests. Zephyros paused, his expression calculating. The Emperor wishes to make an example of this situation. We cannot allow subjects to believe that human innovation exceeds imperial capability. After the communication ended, Vexhai turned to Lyralii with something approaching sympathy. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Publicly denounce the humans' actions and destroy the device, or face charges of cultural contamination and sedition. Walking home through the settlement, Lyralii noticed how the evening light caught the movements of citizens going about their daily routines. Everything looked the same, but underneath the familiar patterns, she sensed the electric tension of change beginning to build. Near the plaza's edge, she spotted Elena Vasquez adjusting a maintenance panel, apparently unaware that Imperial forces were already being dispatched to arrest her. Keth was sleeping when Lyralii returned, curled up in his bed with the mobility device powered down but still attached. In the soft light from their dwelling's luminescent, Emperor Thalen's morning routine had been the same for 37 years, meditation in the crystal chamber, review of overnight intelligence reports, breakfast with exactly 12 varieties of imported fruit, and a holographic briefing from his advisors. Today, however, the intelligence report contained something that made his perfectly calibrated morning spiral into chaos. A human engineer, he repeated slowly, staring at the holographic display showing Elena Vasquez adjusting what appeared to be a completely mundane atmospheric processor. A single human engineer has somehow undermined the genetic superiority doctrine that has kept our empire stable for 8 centuries. Minister Kael'thon, whose responsibility for internal harmony had just become significantly more complicated, nodded grimly. The recordings of the child walking have been viewed over 2 billion times across the imperial network. Citizens are calling it the miracle of Kepler 442b and asking why our medical science couldn't achieve the same result. The Elon activated the chamber's primary display, watching the footage that had apparently captivated half the galaxy. The Ethani child moved with natural grace, the human device so seamlessly integrated that it looked like decorative jewelry rather than medical equipment. What disturbed the Emperor most was not the technology itself, but the child's obvious joy. Have our biotechnicians analyzed the device? The Elon asked. Extensively, Your Majesty, replied Chief Science Advisor Veltar, materializing via hologram from the Imperial Research Complex. The engineering is remarkable in its simplicity. Rather than attempting to correct the biological deficiency, the human created a support system that works with the existing physiology. It's an approach our scientists never considered because... She paused delicately. Because we've been so focused on genetic perfection that we forgot about practical solutions, the Elon finished irritably. Continue. The device could be adapted for countless conditions our medical doctrine considers incurable. The human essentially solved in days what our research institutes have classified as impossible for decades. Defense Minister Karex leaned forward in his chair, his ears rigid with military precision. Your Majesty, the security implications are severe. If humans can demonstrate superior problem-solving capabilities, it undermines the fundamental justification for imperial hierarchy. Subject worlds are already questioning why they accept Ethani leadership. The Elon stood and began pacing, a habit that his security detail had learned to interpret as a sign of impending policy changes. The crystal chamber's walls reflected his movement in infinite fractal patterns, creating the illusion of an army of concerned emperors all wrestling with the same problem. What do we know about this human? He asked. Minister Kael'thon activated a personnel file. Elena Vasquez, age 32, mechanical engineer with specialization in adaptive systems. No political affiliations, no criminal record, no apparent awareness that her actions have created a galactic incident. According to surveillance reports, she spent yesterday evening teaching her colleague how to repair a broken food synthesizer. She's completely ordinary, the Elon mused. Which somehow makes this worse. If extraordinary humans can outperform our best scientists, what does that say about ordinary humans versus ordinary Ethani? The chamber's communication system chimed with an urgent priority message. Chief Intelligence Director Mordain appeared in holographic form, her expression tightly controlled. Your Majesty, the situation is escalating. We've intercepted communications from 47 worlds reporting organized discussions about human capabilities. Medical facilities are being questioned about their inability to provide similar solutions. Most concerning, several planetary governors have privately inquired about hiring human consultants for previously classified projects. The Elon felt the familiar weight of imperial responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead cloak. Every decision he made affected trillions of beings across hundreds of worlds. The Empire's stability depended on the careful maintenance of social hierarchy, and a single act of human compassion was threatening to topple the entire structure. Options? He asked simply. We could classify the technology and claim it violates safety protocols, suggested Veltar. Declare the device dangerous and order its destruction. Except the child is demonstrably healthier and happier, Carex pointed out. Citizens would see through such an obvious fabrication. We could promote it as an example of Ethani innovation, offered Kael'thon. Claim our scientists developed the technology and used the human as a test subject. Thalen's laugh was entirely without humor. And when investigators discover the truth, the credibility damage would be catastrophic. Defense Minister Carex straightened in his chair. There is a more direct approach, Your Majesty. Arrest the human on charges of violating non-interference protocols. Make an example that demonstrates the consequences of overstepping species boundaries. Arresting someone for helping a child walk, the Elon said slowly. Do you realize how that will be perceived? We'd be confirming every negative stereotype about imperial cruelty while making this human into a martyr. The alternative is allowing the precedent to stand, Carex replied firmly. If humans believe they can solve our problems better than we can, imperial authority becomes meaningless. The Emperor returned to his meditation alcove, settling into the crystalline chair that had been used by his predecessors for over a millennium. The weight of tradition pressed down on him as heavily as the immediate crisis. The Empire had survived rebellions, economic collapses, and military defeats, but it had never faced a threat quite like this, the simple demonstration that their assumed superiority might be a carefully maintained illusion. Your Majesty, Minister Kael'thon ventured carefully, there may be a middle path. We arrest the human publicly to demonstrate that boundaries still exist, but privately, we begin incorporating human innovation into imperial research. We maintain political control while gaining technological advantage. The Elon considered this. The proposal had a certain cynical elegance, punish the individual while exploiting the innovation. It was exactly the kind of pragmatic compromise that had kept the Empire stable for centuries. Director Mordain, he addressed the intelligence chief, what is your assessment of human reaction to arresting their engineer? Minimal organized resistance expected, Mordain replied promptly. Humans in imperial space are accustomed to accepting Ethani justice. However, the engineer appears to have earned considerable respect from both human and Ethani colleagues. Local unrest is probable. And the broader implications? The arrest will be seen as confirmation of imperial strength by traditional supporters, but may accelerate questioning among moderate citizens. The key will be controlling the narrative. The Elon made his decision with the kind of certainty that had characterized his reign. Issue arrest warrants for the human. Charges of violating species non-interference protocols and endangering imperial security through unauthorized technology transfer. Elena was elbow-deep in the guts of a malfunctioning atmospheric recycler when Jake burst into the workshop, his face pale and his usual composure completely absent. Elena, you need to see this, he panted, waving his communication tablet like it contained either lottery numbers or a death sentence. Imperial News Network just broadcast your name to about half the galaxy. She looked up from the tangle of plasma conduits she'd been wrestling with for the past hour. Please tell me it's for winning some kind of engineering award and not for accidentally starting an interstellar incident. Jake's expression answered that question before he could speak. Right then, Elena sighed, setting down her plasma spanner. How bad is it? Scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being mild diplomatic embarrassment and 10 being execution by molecular disintegrator. Somewhere around 15, Jake replied, activating the holographic display. Imperial arrest warrant, charges of violating non-interference protocols, endangering Imperial security, and unauthorized technology transfer. Oh, and they've classified you as a person of galactic interest, which I'm pretty sure isn't the good kind of interest. Elena stared at the official Imperial seal floating above Jake's tablet, complete with her personnel photo and a list of charges written in the flowing script of formal Ethani. Well, that escalated quickly. Yesterday I was fixing air filters, today I'm apparently a threat to galactic stability. This isn't funny, Elena, Jake said, though he was fighting back what might have been inappropriate laughter. Imperial security doesn't issue warrants for jaywalking. They're sending a full enforcement squadron. A squadron? For one human engineer. Elena couldn't help but grin. I'm flattered. Though I have to ask, what exactly is unauthorized technology transfer? Did I accidentally invent faster-than-light travel while building a leg brace? The workshop's main communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. Elena accepted it, and Colony Administrator Patterson's worried face materialized in the holographic display. Vasquez, please tell me you're aware of the situation and have some kind of plan that doesn't involve all of us getting deported to a mining prison in the Outer Rim. I'm working on it, Elena replied with more confidence than she felt. How long until the Imperial forces arrive? 6 hours, according to the diplomatic channels that are currently screaming at me about unauthorized personnel actions. Patterson rubbed his temples. Elena, what were you thinking? One kid's mobility aid has somehow become a symbol of human technological superiority. I was thinking that watching a child struggle to walk was depressing, Elena said simply. The political implications kind of escaped me at the time. Jake pulled up additional news feeds on his tablet. It gets worse. Apparently, footage of Keth, that's the kid's name, has gone viral across the Imperial network. Citizens are calling it proof that human innovation exceeds Ethani capabilities. Elena watched the news reports with growing amazement. The simple mobility device she'd built in her spare time was being analyzed by experts across dozens of worlds. Medical professionals were debating the implications of her design choices. Political commentators were discussing what it meant for interspecies relations. I built a leg brace, she said incredulously. It's not exactly revolutionary technology. Any competent engineer could have done the same thing. But they didn't, Jake pointed out. That's the problem. The Ethani medical establishment declared the kid's condition incurable, and you proved them wrong in your spare time using salvaged mining equipment. The communication system chimed again. This time, the incoming message carried the distinctive harmonic signature of Ethani technology. Elena accepted it, and found herself face-to-face with Lyralii, the child's mother. Engineer Vasquez, Lyralii began formally, her elegant ears drooped with distress, I must warn you. Imperial enforcement officers arrived at our settlement this morning. They are preparing for your arrest. I figured that much, Elena replied. How's Keth handling all the excitement? A smile flickered across Lyralii's features despite her obvious worry. He asked if this means he's famous. I explained that sometimes being famous is complicated. That's one way to put it, Elena agreed. Look, I don't want you or your family caught up in this mess. If it helps your situation, I can publicly state that I acted without consultation or permission. You misunderstand, Lyralii said quietly. I am not contacting you to distance myself from your actions. I am contacting you to warn you because what you did for my son was worth any political consequence. The transmission ended, leaving Elena staring at the empty holographic space with a strange mix of emotions. Jake was reviewing tactical displays on his tablet, trying to calculate escape routes and hideout possibilities with the methodical approach he'd learned during his military service. The transport shuttle is fueled and ready, he reported. We could have you off planet in 20 minutes if we move fast. Elena shook her head. Running would just make things worse. Besides, where would I go? Imperial space extends for hundreds of light years in every direction. There are independent systems, Jake argued. Neutral zones where Imperial authority doesn't reach. And then what? Spend the rest of my life as a fugitive because I helped a kid walk. Elena picked up her plasma spanner and went back to work on the atmospheric recycler. I don't think so. Patterson's voice crackled through the workshop's intercom system. All personnel, report to the main assembly area. Imperial enforcement vessels have entered the system. Elena looked out the workshop's viewport and saw them, sleek Ethani cruisers descending through the atmosphere with the kind of graceful precision that made human spacecraft look like flying bricks by comparison. Their crystalline hulls caught the light of Kepler 442b's twin suns, creating rainbow patterns that were probably beautiful if you weren't the person they were coming to arrest. Well, she said philosophically, at least I'll finally get to see the Imperial capital. I hear the architecture is spectacular. Jake stared at her as if she'd announced plans to take up recreational volcano surfing. They're not taking you on a sightseeing tour, Elena. This is serious. I know it's serious, she replied, putting down her tools and straightening her work coveralls. But what's the alternative? Panic? Hide in a supply closet and hope they don't notice me? I helped a kid walk, Jake. If the Ethani Empire considers that a crime worthy of a full military response, then maybe it's time someone pointed out how ridiculous that is. The enforcement vessels touched down in the colony's main landing area with barely a whisper of displaced air. Elena watched through the viewport as teams of Imperial officers emerged, their movements coordinated with military precision. They wore the distinctive armor of the Imperial Guard, its surfaces shifting between opacity and transparency based on lighting conditions. Elena Vasquez, came the amplified voice from outside, speaking in accented but fluent standard. By order of His Imperial Majesty the Elon the 17th, you are commanded to surrender yourself for transport to Ethros Prime to face charges of violating Imperial law. Elena walked to the workshop's main door and activated the external speakers. Give me 5 minutes to finish fixing this atmospheric recycler. Colony regulations require all life support systems to be operational before personnel can be transferred off-site. There was a pause, presumably while the officers consulted their procedures manual about appropriate responses to arrestees who were more concerned about maintenance schedules than imperial justice. You have 5 minutes, came the reply, with what Elena could have sworn was a note of amusement. She turned back to Jake, who was watching the proceedings with the expression of someone witnessing either history or catastrophe. Take care. The Imperial Court of Ethros Prime was exactly as magnificent as Elena had imagined and exactly as intimidating as she'd feared. Crystalline walls soared overhead in impossible spirals, their surfaces alive with shifting patterns of light that seemed to respond to the emotional resonance of everyone present. She stood in the defendant's circle, wearing the same work coveralls she'd been arrested in, surrounded by enough imperial pageantry to fund the small planet's infrastructure for a decade. Emperor Elon sat on the throne of infinite reflection, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the packed courtroom. Representatives from dozens of worlds had gathered to witness what the news networks were calling the trial of the human engineer. Elena couldn't help but notice that many of the spectators were watching her with curiosity rather than hostility. Elena Vasquez of the human colony Kepler 442b, the court herald announced, his voice carrying through translation circuits to every corner of the vast chamber, you stand accused of violating imperial non-interference protocols, unauthorized technology transfer, and endangering the security of the Ethani Empire. How do you respond to these charges? Elena looked around the courtroom, noting the holocameras recording every moment for broadcast across the galaxy. Well, Your Honor, sorry, Your Imperial Majesty, I have to ask, is helping a child walk really that dangerous to galactic security? Because if it is, you might want to review your security protocols. A ripple of what might have been laughter ran through the spectator sections, quickly suppressed by court officials. Emperor Thalen's ears twitched almost imperceptibly, a sign that Elena's irreverence was either amusing or irritating him, possibly both. The defendant will show proper respect for imperial proceedings, warned Chief Prosecutor Velnath, whose prosecutorial robes seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. This court addresses matters of species hierarchy and galactic stability, not individual sentiment. Right, Elena nodded seriously. Because individual sentiment is clearly the enemy of stable government. I can see how helping one kid might topple an empire that spans half the galaxy. The prosecutor activated a holographic display showing footage of Elena working on the mobility device. The defendant's actions have created unprecedented disruption. Citizens across 47 worlds are questioning Imperial medical capabilities. Planetary governors are requesting human technical advisors. The very foundation of Ethani leadership is being undermined. Elena studied the display with professional interest. That's fascinating. You're saying that people are asking questions because I built a leg brace. Maybe the real problem isn't my engineering skills, but the fact that your empire is built on the assumption that questioning things is dangerous. Emperor the Elon leaned forward slightly. You show remarkable composure for someone facing life imprisonment, human. Do you not understand the severity of your situation? I understand that I'm standing trial for helping a child walk, Elena replied. If that's a capital offense in your empire, then maybe it's time to examine what kind of empire you're running. The courtroom fell silent except for the soft humming of the translation circuits. Elena realized that her simple honesty was having an effect she hadn't anticipated, forcing everyone present to confront the fundamental absurdity of the proceedings. Chief Justice Mortain activated his speaking podium. The defendant's motivations are irrelevant. The law exists to maintain order between species. When humans exceed their designated roles, chaos follows. Chaos like a kid being able to run and play with his friends? Elena asked. Because that's the only chaos I created. Well, that and apparently making some people realize that the words impossible and incurable might not mean what they thought they meant. A communication alert chimed through the court systems. Emperor the Elon accepted it, and a holographic display materialized showing Administrator Patterson from Elena's colony, along with Lyralii and several other Ethani citizens. Your Imperial Majesty, Patterson began formally, we request permission to address the court as character witnesses for the defendant. The Elon considered this, then gestured acceptance. Lyralii stepped forward, her elegant ears held high with determination. Your Majesty, I am the mother of the child this human helped. Before her intervention, my son could barely walk across a room. Today, he runs with other children, laughs without pain, and dreams of a future that seemed impossible. If helping a child imagine a better tomorrow is a crime, then I am proud to be complicit in this crime. Other Ethani citizens stepped forward, each testifying about Elena's character and the positive impact of her work. Elena found herself surprised by their support, especially given the potential consequences they faced for speaking on her behalf. Emperor the Elon listened to each testimony, his expression growing more thoughtful. Finally, he raised a hand for silence. This court has heard extensive testimony about the defendant's character and motivations. However, the law remains clear regarding species non-interference. He paused, studying Elena with eyes that seemed older than his apparent age. Yet the court must also consider the broader implications of this case. The Emperor stood, his movement creating cascading light patterns across the crystalline walls. Elena Vasquez, your actions have indeed created disruption across the empire. Citizens are questioning policies that have maintained stability for centuries. Planetary governments are requesting human advisors. The technological superiority that justifies Ethani leadership has been challenged. Elena braced herself for the verdict, trying to maintain her composure despite the magnitude of what was at stake. However, the Elon continued, this disruption has also revealed something important about the empire we have built. When citizens ask better questions, they deserve better answers. When subjects request improved solutions, wise leaders provide them. Your compassion has exposed weaknesses in our systems that required addressing. The Emperor's next words surprised everyone, including Elena. The charges against Elena Vasquez are dismissed. Furthermore, this court hereby establishes the Imperial Commission for Interspecies Cooperation, charged with identifying areas where collaborative human-ethani innovation can benefit all citizens of the Empire. The courtroom erupted in surprised discussion, quickly suppressed by court officials who seemed as stunned as the spectators. Additionally, the Elan announced, genetic purity laws that prevent citizens from receiving beneficial treatments will be reviewed and reformed. No Imperial subject should suffer needlessly due to outdated policies. Elena stood in the defendant's circle, trying to process what had just happened. Your Majesty, does this mean I can go home and get back to fixing atmospheric recyclers? Emperor Thalen's expression might have been amused. You may return home, Elena Vasquez. Though I suspect your future will involve more than maintenance work. 3 months later, Elena stood in her expanded workshop on Kepler 442b, supervising a team of human and ethani engineers working on adaptive technology projects. Through the viewport, she could see Keth playing with a group of children, both human and ethani, his mobility device now one of dozens being manufactured for citizens across the Empire. Jake approached with a communication tablet showing their latest project requests. We've got 17 new cases this week, including a request from the Imperial Medical Academy for consultation on neural interface design. Elena grinned, tightening a fusion coupling on her latest invention, an atmospheric processor that adapted to multiple species' respiratory requirements. You know what the funny thing is? I never wanted to change the galaxy. I just wanted to help one kid walk. Well, Jake replied, watching their mixed-species engineering team collaborate on solutions that would have been impossible under the old non-interference protocols. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes. Elena nodded, returning to her work with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had discovered that fixing things, whether broken machinery or broken systems, was still the best job in the galaxy.